The Dark Forest, originally released in China on May 1st, 2008, is Liu Cixin's second installment within his Remembrance of Earth's Past trilogy. Try saying that 5 times fast. Does this book take the series to universal heights? Well, my name is The Advocate, and today I'm an advocate for reviewing this fair book. Like, comment, and subscribe to support a small channel. So just a heads up, this review will strictly be talking about the Dark Forest book and not about any of the 3 Body Problem TV show adaptations, which, as I understand, include material from the first couple of chapters from this book. So you've been warned. So for those of you who did not watch my review of the 3 Body Problem, which if you haven't, I encourage you to do so, overall, I enjoyed that book. For the most part. Liu Cixin incorporates some very interesting scientific concepts which help to make this story quite fascinating. However, the 3 Body Problem does occasionally teeter towards feeling somewhat soulless, as that book places a larger focus on exploring technical concepts rather than on exploring the human heart and mind. And truthfully, The Dark Forest is not much different. Now, without bearing the lead, I very much like The Dark Forest and found it to be a stronger read overall than its predecessor. But I do first want to address my biggest critique of this book, and that is with regards to the writing. Now, The Dark Forest's writing is serviceable, but similar to the 3 Body Problem, Liu once again approaches his prose in a very mathematical, almost robotic way. Rather than delving into descriptive adjective, Liu has a tendency to describe objects, actions, and pretty much everything else within this book with numbers. And I'm not just talking about numbers being used during scientific conversations between our academically gifted characters, but within the narration as well. Finally, she's not tall, 160 centimeters or so. Their first destination was the largest exhibition hall. It was 200 meters long and softly lit. The cabin could reach a maximum speed of 500 kilometers per hour, but even at that speed, it would take 68 hours to reach the space elevator's terminus in geostationary orbit. The scene cut to a downward-facing camera installed beneath the cabin. Here, the 60-centimeter rail occupied the larger part of the screen. I mean, I'm not expecting Tolkien levels of poetic elaboration here, but there is definitely a lack of emotional depth when it comes to providing any sort of prose that goes beyond simplistic numerical description. Liu's composition is glaringly basic, but I suppose you could say that the cold utilitarian prose does complement the equally cold and occasionally cruel events that take place within this story. So perhaps Liu's lack of complexity sometimes does work to the story's benefit. Now, to veer more positively, despite my qualms with the writing, Liu Cixin does, to my surprise, address some of my biggest criticisms with the 3 Body Problem book. Not to the extent that he will win over every reader who disliked the first book, but just enough to potentially win over some readers who may have been more mixed on that book. So let's break it down. What about the Dark Forest is better than the 3 Body Problem? Well, number 1, the story. Now, I didn't hate the 3 Body Problem story. In fact, once I got over the dry text, I became really engrossed in that book. But the 3 Body Problem's primary purpose is to set up the main conflict between the people of Earth and the people of Tri-Solaris. The events surrounding the 3 Body video game and Ye Wenjie's time at Radar Peak are essentially just window dressing for that setup. But now that the stage has finally been set for the Tri-Solarians' 450-year-away planetary assault on Earth, Liu finally uses the Dark Forest as an opportunity to shift the narrative into a more action-oriented story. The people of Earth go on the offensive as they scramble to devise strategies in the face of potential impending destruction, and despite Liu's more basic writing style, the way in which he chronicles different people's reactions to this oncoming assault is very immersive and reads how very real people would react if an extraterrestrial threat were to happen here in real life on Earth. Additionally, reading through the vast quantity of ideas that the scientific characters pitch in order to thwart Tri-Solaris is intellectually stimulating. Drawing on his deep knowledge of astronomy and physics, Liu stretches the boundaries of scientific possibility while also engaging in speculative scenarios on how each idea could potentially play out. It's peak science fiction. Number 2. Liu's characterization in this book is better than in the previous book. Yes, the characters are still sacrificial proxies for the plot, which I've heard is pretty standard fare for Chinese fiction, And no, these are still not your Joe Abercrombie fully realized characters who beg us to ask questions like, who are we really? but Liu does seem to have a better grasp on what constitutes a personality this time around. In a jarring turn of events, Liu drops the characters of Ye Wenjie and Wang Miao, which I'm kind of conflicted on, truth be told, and replaces them in the Dark Forest with a brand new character in the apathetic yet intelligent astronomer named Luoji. Luoji is our predominant main character here, and although Luoji, like his predecessors, has this annoying same tendency to talk in this robotic mechanical way that I am still not a fan of, Luoji actually makes for a decently interesting character. Luoji has a lot more going on for him personality-wise than the Three Body Problems main character Wang Miao, as, without spoiling too much, Luoji's character changes with each new event within the story. As far as other characters go, Da Shi, one of the more colorful characters from the first book, makes his effervescent return here in the Dark Forest, and in addition to that, we have 3 new characters whom are each written with a surprising amount of depth and hidden dark undertones that also are added to the story and help elevate this book's first half, which we'll cover more in detail in the spoiler section. Now with that said, although Liu's character writing is improved when compared to the Three Body Problem, it still isn't perfect, or even consistent throughout this book. First off, not everyone receives characterization, as the first 100 pages of the Dark Forest essentially consist of a dog's breakfast of interchangeable one-note characters whose really only identifying feature is their scientific or militaristic title. Next off, the characters that do receive development, i.e. Luoji and the 3 other characters who I have yet to mention, continue to have this annoying tendency to delve into long technical monologues that don't really do much for the overall story except, I guess, inform us of a secret penis measuring contest where the person who can spout the longest, most uninterrupted scientific discourse gets like a gold star or something. That, and they continue to blurt out their internal state of mind with little regard for nuance. And last off, the relationship between some of these characters feels rather inhuman. Now, I don't want to delve into this topic too much, as there could potentially be a cultural or language barrier here that's going over my head. But there is a specific romantic pairing within this book that, in my opinion, just doesn't work. It feels like a heavy-handed, ooh, look at how in love these 2 characters are because they tell each other they love each other all the time. And it's just not my cup of boba. The relationship feels forced and not really built up organically throughout the story. Not to mention that the female character within this pairing is your box-standard manic pixie dream girl, and a boringly written one-note manic pixie dream girl at that their relationship never really grows much beyond the cliches of locking eyes with each other and smiling gigglingly. But despite all these less than desirable writing elements, Liu still makes an effort to offer some connection to some of the characters, especially Luoji. It might not be enough to fully satisfy every reader, but just enough to make these characters feel more engaging than they did in the Three Body Problem. Moving on with the list of improvements, number 3, the scope. The scope for this book, oh boy, is much larger and more interesting than the previous book. Now, part of this larger scope is inevitable given that we're now dealing with the, impossibly large vacuum of outer space. But more than that, the breadth that this book covers is quite possibly the biggest thing I've ever read in fictional literature. However, before I can further elaborate on that, we'll need to delve into spoilers! If you have not read The Dark Forest, skip ahead to the end of this video to hear my final thoughts on this book. Otherwise, stick around and let's talk spoilers. So yes, this book's scope is humongous, because not only does it cover large distances of length between our 2 warring factions, but large spans of time as well, as the Dark Forest contains a 200-year time skip that occurs 3/5 of the way through the book. Wow. Liu promised us a 450-year trilogy, and I guess we're going to get just that. Now, despite this book taking place over the course of 213 years, and humans typically having a lifespan that is much less than that, Liu does cheat a little bit here. Rather than creating new point-of-view main characters who are born 200 years later in the timeline, Liu instead has his characters we are already familiar with go into cryostasis and then be released from cryostasis 2 centuries later or when they are needed for the story. Now, this could be a potentially disappointing narrative strategy for some readers, but I actually don't mind this, as by the time we reach the time skip in the book, I'm already invested in the characters of Luoji and Da Shi. and I'm curious to see what kind of antics they get up to in the distant future. This framework is also nothing new for the series, as the three-body problem also had a similar narrative structure in which both halves of that book were separated by some distance in time. However, I actually prefer the way Liu handles the structure of this book when compared to the structure of the three-body problem, as the events of this book actually follow a singular chronology. There are no flashbacks, tangents, or flash forwards. It's currently Crisis Era Year 20, now it's Crisis Era Year 205. That's it. Liu commits to his time skip, and I love it. Now, as far as the actual post-time skip story goes, I know this might sound like I'm exaggerating, but I am being completely honest with you guys. I genuinely believe Liu's vision of the distant future is the most creative depiction of Earth's future I've ever encountered in any form of entertainment media, ever. Honestly, I was blown away by the sheer number of ideas Liu brings to life in his vision of what Earth's future could look like. I mean, you've got your standard issue futuristic ideas like flying cars and desertification, but Liu also incorporates other unique elements of dystopia and utopia, such as a beautifully built underground city standing on a mechanically engineered light-up tree underneath an artificial sky, whilst Earth is not able to progress technologically because of the Trisolar Sophon block on their technology. The creative inventiveness of it all makes for a visually stimulating read, even despite Liu's continued use of simplistic description. The latter two-fifths of this book is the Dark Forest's best stuff. And even when the novelty of reading what the future looks like eventually wears off, the story moments that transpired during this future sequence are definitely ones that will stick with me for some time. But before we delve further into the future, I'm actually going to take a page from the Three-Body Problem book and flash us back to some of the spoiler elements from the first three-fifths of this book, because I think there's a lot of good stuff to unpack there as well. Liu's ability to genuinely surprise me both prior to and after the time skip was a genuine delight, as he consistently found ways to creatively come up with some new wrinkle that adds more interesting layers to the story. In fact, you could make a list of all the times the Dark Forest pulls a fast one on the reader, and every time it does, it works to enhance the story, in my opinion. What will the world do as it comes to grips with the grim reality of the looming Trisolaran assault? Boom, wall facers. How will this play into the story of our new Luoji main character? Boom, he's a wall facer now. What strategies are these wall facers going to devise? Boom, humongous ideas that have terrifying ulterior motives for the people of Earth. Will these wall facers be able to pull off their horrifying Hail Mary plans? Nope, because boom, wall breakers. The constant unveiling of each new revelatory twist, while still staying within the logical framework of the story, is such a rush and consistently kept me on my toes. My favorite of these twists being the 15-page sequence right before the time skip when wall-facer Ray Diaz has his super interesting ulterior motive to crash Venus, Earth, and Mars into the sun via the solar system chain reaction bomb unveiled to him by a wall breaker. Wall breakers being humans who are loyal to the Trisolarans and want to decipher and dismantle the wall facer's plans. This then leads Ray Diaz to threaten to detonate missiles on Mercury, which he then reveals to be fake, only to then threaten to blow up the United Nations with secret bombs connected to a detonator on his wristwatch, only to then secretly reveal to Garanon that there was no detonator and his wristwatch was a fake all along, only to then have the people of Venezuela turn on Ray Diaz and stone him to death. Whoa, what a ride. I mean, I'm not partial on these twists being revealed through long-winded exposition, but this entire chain of events, pun intended, delivers some of the best written surprises I've ever read in science fiction. It's moments like these that make this story an unforgettable read for me. That despite some weariness I felt at the beginning of this book when I was being bogged down by a revolving cast of one-dimensional characters, that all of this would eventually come together to form this beautiful yet hauntingly cold look at humanity. But it's not just that. It's not just that. Because the number one thing I took away from this story that I think Liu successfully explores is the fleeting insignificance of our human lives. I'm no nihilist. If you must know, I'm a man of faith. But it's very easy to look at our lives and get that main character energy going, that everything we do has some sort of importance or relevance to society. But then, at the drop of a hat, or more appropriately, the drop of a tear, it can all implode on you. The you who thought was going to exist for decades, or the you who thought was going to leave a legacy long after that, is immediately vaporized. And yet, the universe continues. disinterested and indifferent to you, with no one left to remember. All that's left is nothing. Now, to be fair, I don't think Liu is a nihilist either, but these macabre concepts that he weaves into this narrative are frighteningly real, especially within the context of our vast, near-infinite and unforgiving cosmos. And the two moments within the story that really brought humanity's insignificance into sharp focus for me were: 1. The 200-year time skip where virtually every minor character that had some sort of speaking role at the beginning of the book fades away. Some even lost to history. Even our old pal from the first book, Wang Miao, receives nothing more than a fleeting one-sentence mention without even acknowledging his name. And 2. The devastating moment when a simple teardrop probe eliminates an entire combined fleet of Earth spaceships within minutes. And thus, in an instant, all the pomp, circumstance, and human life aboard these spaceships ceases to be. Whoever these people were aboard these ships are immediately forgotten as panic sets in back on Earth, as humanity is now frighteningly very well aware of Trisolaris' very real threat. Even Liu's mechanical writing, which I've oft mentioned as not being my favorite, chillingly complements this entire sequence very well. By the time the fragment had flown roughly 1,500 kilometers from the explosion site toward the corner of the formation, only 51 seconds had elapsed. By the time it reached the corner, it was traveling at a speed of 31.7 kilometers per second. Now it was on the periphery of the formation, 160 kilometers away from Infinite Frontier, the first warship in this corner of the array. The fragment did not pass by the formation, but executed a 30-degree turn, and without slowing down, sped straight toward Infinite Frontier. The droplet struck Infinite Frontier in its rear third and passed through with no resistance, as if penetrating a shadow. After passing through Infinite Frontier, the droplet continued onward at a speed of 30 kilometers per second. In the space of 3 seconds, it had crossed 90 kilometers, passing first through Yuanfang, Infinite Frontier's neighbor in the first row, and then through Foghorn, Antarctica, and Ultimate, leaving their holes red hot as if the warships were giant lamps lined up. Then Infinite Frontier exploded. Real people are being obliterated within seconds as the teardrop instantaneously tears through ships, and Liu tactlessly, yet appropriately horrifically, reduces these very real people's real deaths to mere numerical velocities of kilometers per second. And although there is much to say about Luoji's consequent actions as he grips with his mortality in a very well done moment of character development, as he stands alone in the desert with his life flashing before his eyes, seriously, well done, Liu Cixin. Luoji manages to turn the tables on Trisolaris by revealing the terrible implications of the Dark Forest theory. Hinted at earlier in the story when Luoji managed to place a spell on a close-by planet that eventually got destroyed, unless Trisolaris wants the location of their fleet revealed to any other would-be hunter planets that might want to destroy them in the forest of this universe, then Trisolaris will remove their teardrops from the Sun and Earth's orbit. Trisolaris agrees, Luoji becomes a heroic figure, temporarily, and both Trisolaris and Earth enter into a cold war, with neither wanting to make the first move lest other hunter planets destroy both of them in mutually assured destruction. Yet, even with Earth's precarious upper hand, the sheer brutality of the teardrop's destruction at the climax of this story is what will remain ingrained in my mind long after I've finished reading this book. It's a cold, quiet, and scary universe out there, and I think it's in our best interest as people of Earth to keep it quiet. And that, my friends, is the Dark Forest, an occasionally one-dimensional, yet thought-provoking and immersive read. This book probably won't win over many new readers who are looking for well-developed characters or nuanced writing, but the Dark Forest's sharper narrative focus in combination with an epic story make this book a superior book to The Three-Body Problem and a story I don't think I'll ever forget. But thank you so much, my comrades, for watching this video. Definitely let me know what your thoughts are on this book and series in general down in the comments section below. I have indeed finished my read-through of Death's End, the third and final book within the Remembrance of Earth's Past trilogy, and do intend on reviewing that book in a future video, so stay tuned to my YouTube community posts and follow me on Blue Sky for future updates on said review. Until then, The Advocate, out.